I'm going to talk today about C.T. Studd. I don't know how many of you are familiar with him or know who he was or what he did, but I really enjoyed learning about this missionary. Charles Thomas C.T. Studd was born in 1860 in England into a very wealthy family. He was one of 6 sons. His father, Edward, had made a fortune in India and came back to build a very large estate in England. Edward was very into sports and especially owning, racing, and betting on horses. He owned some of the finest horses in all of England and had quite the reputation of gambler and man of the world. Of course, the family regularly attended the Church of England. It was kind of a thing everybody did back then. And some of the boys have been quoted as saying they dreaded Sundays because they felt it was the one day there was no fun. Edward, the father, was invited by a friend to hear an American speaker one night. His name was D.L. Moody. And after 2 successive nights, Edward gave his life to Christ. This dramatically changed the entire scope of the Studd family. Mr. Studd went from reputation as gambler to radically changed for Christ. He became an incredible evangelist into his community. They left the Church of England and hosted meetings out of their own home on their estate, much to the chagrin of all the boys. Visiting pastors, etc., came in and out of their home, and Edward was able to see the conversion of all 6 of his sons before his untimely death 2 years after his conversion. But his impact made a great impact on all of the sons in the family. It's really kind of interesting that people go by initials, but 3 of the sons all attended Cambridge, and they went by the initials J.E.K., G.B., and C.T. I don't know how they kept all that straight, but I guess they did. They were all very successful champion cricket players in England. The 3 brothers created a record at Cambridge, which has never been equaled, by each being the captain of the championship team 3 years in succession. GB first in 82, CT in 83, and then JEK in 84. And that record has never been broken. But only one of the 3 stood to be an outstanding witness for Christ at school, and that was JEK. CT went on to be both a cricket star at the collegiate level and also professionally, even traveling to Australia to be on the national team. And there's still a big competition between Australia and England in cricket called the Ashes. And he was a part of one of those founding teams that created that kind of little rivalry. He became very famous throughout England and was very much into the fame that came with being a famous cricket star. It was a serious illness of his brother, GB, that caused him to rethink his life. He went immediately to the bedside of his brother, and as he sat there, reflected on, what's GB have but Jesus to look forward to in eternity? Maybe I need to rethink my life here. He calls those years his backslid years in college, and he got his heart right with the Lord during the time of the illness of his brother, and the Lord miraculously raised his brother up to full health again. And it said that CT soon developed a fervor like he never had before. The lure of cricket and fame no longer appealed to him. He just wanted to win souls for Christ. And there was a great revival in his heart. God led him one day to a meeting where he heard in person missionary Hudson Taylor share of the great needs in the country of China. And it was during this time that he felt a call into full-time missions. This was very distressing to his mother, who, as a widow, didn't want her children going all over the world. Back then, when you went on the missions field, you usually went to die. That was kind of the mentality. They prepared everything and often took their coffins and everything with them when they went to the mission field. And Mother was like very, very upset that, the famous C.T. Studd of England would choose a lifestyle like this. But even though his mother was opposed, he spent many days fasting and praying. And even though he was disappointing his mother, he knew he must follow the Lord's call. They formed a group of what became known the Cambridge Seven. And 7 of very, I could tell you all their names if anybody's ever interested, but some of them became quite famous later in life and had impact and influence on many people who we know today. R.A. Torrey was one of their compatriots. He's not one of the Cambridge Seven, but had great influence in that group. And Norman Grubb, who's a prolific writer. A lot of people had a lot of impact from the Cambridge Seven. But they traveled all through England promoting Hudson Taylor's ministry into China. And because of his popularity, he drew crowds in the hundreds. Hundreds and hundreds of people came to hear C.T. share his testimony. And it said that even Queen Victoria herself was very, very excited to have his personal testimony for herself. One of his quotes that I think we all know and have heard, "If Jesus died for me, then no sacrifice can be too great for me to make for him." And that became his mantra as he traveled throughout promoting. So in 1885, the Cambridge Seven set off to China and landed there. They adopted the lifestyle like Hudson Taylor had of the national dress and moving inland to minister for the Lord. When, after 2 years in China, C.T. turned 25 and inherited a very large sum of money. It would be the equivalent to millions today, because the family was quite wealthy. And, his mother thought, oh, now he'll come back from China and go into his inheritance. But after prayer and fasting, he gave away his entire fortune, gave it to D.L. Moody and George Mueller. We've heard those names. And he also gave a large portion to other missionaries and pastors all over the place. And once again, if Jesus died for me, then no sacrifice can be too great for me to make for him. He wanted to be known as a person that was dependent upon the Lord and the Lord only. And so he gave his fortune away. In 1988, he met Priscilla Stewart, a beautiful Irish girl who had come to China in 1887. She felt that the Lord, when her testimony is just as fascinating as his, and when she first felt the call to missions, she felt the Lord gave her a vision that she would speak the name of Christ in China, India, and Africa in her lifetime. And she didn't know that that would be fulfilled, but as I share, you'll find out that it was. I thought this was just the cutest thing ever in how they met, which is really kind of cute. I want to read you an excerpt from his biography here. Mrs. Studd says, "If C.T. were here, he would tell you I proposed to him. I did not. As a matter of fact, for certain reasons, I refused him. And when I tell you his answer, you will see it is just characteristic of the man. His reply was, 'You have neither the mind of God nor the will of God in the matter, but I have, and I intend to marry you whether you will or not. So you had better make up your mind and accept the situation.' What was I to do? That is the reason why I'm Mrs. C.T. Studd today." I thought, wow, what a proposal. And this is his letter to her before the actual proposal. "Now, before I go further, I just wanted to beseech you, darling, that we may both make the same request every day to our Father, that he may give us each other up to Jesus every single day of our lives, to be separated or not, just as he pleases, that neither of us may ever make an idol of the other." Isn't that an interesting thing to say to the woman you're proposing to? And he also tells in here, what did he say to her? They had a lot of writing back and forth. Where is this one part that was hilarious to me? Well, anyway, I can't find it right now, but he actually said at one point that he never really considered her beautiful. even though she was actually very stunning, because what he admired and loved her for more than anything was her relationship with Jesus. And when he saw the way she worshiped the Lord, that's all he ever saw of her, and that's all he ever counted as worthy to take her as his wife. And I thought that was really kind of sweet. They served together in China for 10 years. They started their new life with $5. Remember, this was a man who had millions a year before, and now started his married life with his beloved with only $5. They never did lack, though. That is one of their testimonies. For 5 years, they never went outside without a volley of curses being thrown at them in China. They ran an opium refuge, which opened to the victims of opium. That was a large issue. 800 went through the doors, many cured of both drug and soul. The Lord gave them 4 daughters, and if you know the culture of China, that was unusual. In the culture there, if you had a second daughter, they usually disposed of that daughter because it was more, you had more face if you had a son. So they named their daughters to signify the precious gift that they believe that life is. So their first daughter they named Grace. The second one they named Dorothy, which means praise. The third Edith, which means prayer. And their fourth Pauline, which means joy. And the Chinese thought them quite odd that they would be joyful to have 4 daughters. It was a real testimony to the Chinese that they would name a 4th daughter Joy. They had 2 sons that died in infancy, but I love the testimony of Mrs. Studd at the death of their first son. This really spoke to my heart and humbled me immediately. She says, page 92. There we go. We lost one child, and on that occasion I was absolutely alone with Mr. Studd. Mr. Stanley Smith came over when he heard and arrived just in time to help Mr. Studd, who had gone to the city and bought a little pigskin box to put the little figure in and to bury it. I was left alone in my room. I will never forget that experience. It has struck me through life. I felt absolutely brokenhearted, and the question was whether I was going to give in and the whole of my missionary life would be wrecked. Therefore, whilst Mr. Studd was with Mr. Smith, I made a mark in my Bible. I made a covenant with my God that I was not going to let sorrow of any kind come into my life and ruin my life as a missionary. I was not going to let my husband see sorrow that would unhinge him. He never saw a tear when he came back. And I just went, whoa, what a testimony that is. The family returned to England after 10 years due to the poor health of both the Studds. And after a year or so of recovery, the family accepted a calling to India, where C.T. had taken a post as a pastor. From 1900 to 1906, they served in India. All of the girls accepted Christ in India. At that time, they were 12, 10, 8, and 6. The family returned in 1906 to England once again. C.T. had developed asthma that was causing him to become frail, and they realized that they needed to return home. They also realized that the girls needed some schooling. They had difficulty with English because they were raised Chinese, and then they learned Indian language, and so they knew the girls needed to be schooled. And during this time, a sponsor stepped up and paid for the girls to attend the top school, something that they would have done if they had kept all of their finances. So the Lord did miraculously provide for them. C.T. spent time helping his one brother traveling through America with the student volunteer movement. If you know the history of that, it's really kind of interesting as well. At 50 years old, C.T. saw an ad which read, "Cannibals need missionaries too." And this stirred his heart towards Africa. He ran into many obstacles. His wife was too frail at the time to accompany him. His health was not as strong as it was either. Nevertheless, he felt the call of God and felt the need to be obedient. They together had recently formed the mission that now is known as WEC, Worldwide Evangelism Crusade. So he went to Africa on a pioneer journey to see how it would go. He returned after a year and spent time promoting Africa. And then he headed off in, I think it was 1913, to Africa, and he ended up spending 18 years there without a furlough. And during this 18 years, he saw his beloved Priscilla for 2 months. Out of that. This is her testimony of that time. The night before I went to bed, I had an experience. I sat down by the fire, and as I thought of all that was going to happen to me, I began to weep. I do not often weep, but I wept sore that night. Then I thought, this will never do. I'll be ill tomorrow and unable to help anyone. Going up in the train that day to Waterloo, she had gone to see him off, I had been reading a book in which there were 2 references. One was Psalm 34 and the other Daniel 3:29. I decided that in my first spare moment I would read the passages, so I opened my Bible. The very first words, which seemed almost to knock me down, the first was I will. It means determination. It means grit. I will bless. I will make the Lord happy. I will bless the Lord at all times, now. And before I got to the end of the verse, the tears were gone. And I got to the point where I could say, I will make the Lord happy now. And then I read on. I sought the Lord, and he heard me and delivered me from all my fear. And then there was the last, most astonishing of all. He keepeth all his bones, not one of them is broken. And coupled with this promise I was given Daniel 3:29, there is no God that can deliver after this sort. I just felt every fear was gone. All my fears, all my troubles, all that left alone was going to mean, all the fears of CT getting malarial fever or poisoned arrows of the natives and savages. I went to bed that night rejoicing. I laughed the laugh of faith that night. I rose from my knees and wrote the experience to my husband and posted it on to him, though he had not even yet left the country. What a woman, huh? And this is the letter he wrote to her from on board the ship. My darling, God was good to keep us so busy that last night he knew I could not stand much. And so he engineered us right through and gave the glory in our souls. I shall ever picture you running up with the camera. I longed, but dare not, say one more goodbye or yet one more kiss. I dared not. The tears came as I thought of your tears, and tears again of joy at the way he comforted you. Now let us thank him in anticipation, not only with our lips, but by our lives. You little dream of how I know that you pay the greatest price. Only I did not dare say so to you, but I admire you, my darling, and shall ever do so. And God will give us his 100-fold, and the result and honor must ever be according to the magnitude of the sacrifice. Don't be anxious. The Lord will be victor, and he will bring us into a wealthy place. Truly, this has been like the 7 going out. Goodbye, darling Priscilla. We began risking all for God, and we will end as we began, loving each other utterly, and only less than we love our Lord. I don't know about you, but these letters just really humbled me, and I just went, whoa. He went on to have a very successful ministry. The beginning of the book is donated, the acknowledgement, the foreword, is written by his son-in-law. And this kind of sums up his life. And then I want to read you a very famous poem that you're all going to recognize. I didn't know the whole thing was a poem. I only heard the one stanza. C.T.'s life stands as some rugged Gibraltar assigned to all succeeding generations, that it is worthwhile to lose all this world can offer and stake everything on the world to come. His life will be an eternal rebuke to easygoing Christianity. He has demonstrated what it means to follow Christ without counting the cost and never looking back. He was a Calvary leader, and in that capacity led several splendid charges, 3 in particular. They led forth the Cambridge 7 to China. 10 years later, he toured the American universities at the start of the student volunteer movement, and then in 1910 initiated the campaign for the region between the Nile and Lake Chad, the largest unevangelized region in Africa at the time. These 3 things alone have affected missionary history, and through them he forwarded evangelism to an extent that we cannot properly gauge. These were his direct work, but the direct influence which he exerted and which extended in ever-widening circles around the world probably accomplished even more. He personified the heroic spirit the apostolic abandon, which is easy to lose from the work of Christ. His wife went on to, while he was in Africa, was the mouthpiece for WEC, which is now Worldwide Evangelism Crusade, spoke all over the world and encouraged others to go out into that organization that still exists today. And it was really kind of interesting for me to read all about him. And I'm sure you've heard his quote, which he's really, I think we've all seen this one. Some want to live within the sound of church and chapel bell. I want to run a rescue shop within a yard of hell. He was the one who coined that phrase. And he also coined a phrase, only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And the thing I didn't know about that is it's an entire poem. And that's the part we only remember, and that's the little plaque some of us have seen on desks across the world. But I want to close by reading this poem because it really is a neat poem. Only one life, yes, only one. Soon will its fleeting hours be done. Then in that day my Lord to meet and stand before his judgment seat. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. Only one life, the still small voice gently pleads for a better choice, bidding me selfish aims to leave and to God's holy will to cleave. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. Only one life, a few brief years, each with its burdens, hope, and fears, each with its clays I must fulfill, living for self or in his will. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. When this bright world would tempt me sore, when Satan would a victory score, when self would seek to have its way, then help me, Lord, with joy to say, only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only with what's done for Christ will last. Give me, Father, a purpose deep, in joy or sorrow thy word to keep, faithful and true what's e'er the strife, pleasing thee by my daily life. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And when I am dying, how happy I'll be if the lamp of my life has been burned out for thee.